Welcome to episode number 39 of the MMA Rundown podcast. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about this week with Conor McGregor just getting that big win over Donald Cerrone. But I've got a ton of topics to talk about on top of that. Actually, going to be 15 in total. So, first one's obviously going to be Conor getting back in the win column with that win over Donald Cerrone. We've got to talk about what's next for Conor, talk about Cowboy Cerrone, and a take a lot of people have had around him as far as whether or not he's a choker. Speaking of that take, we'll be talking about Stephen A. Smith, who got a lot of crap from a lot of MMA fans for his takes on Cowboy Cerrone, so I'll respond to that. Recap the rest of the card for UFC 246. Then we'll preview next week's UFC, which is going to be UFC Raleigh, headlined by Junior Dos Santos and Curtis Blades. We've got a lot of controversy during fight week when a reporter decided to ask Conor McGregor about his sexual assault allegations, and he was booed heavily by fans. And there was a lot of people who were upset with the fans for booing. I'll give my take on that situation. We've got Dana White talking about how the UFC doesn't have professional cans, which was a phrase that he used when people were talking about how they were trying to give Conor an easy fight. Some people thought, well, how about CM Punk? How about some other people? So I'll respond to his the UFC doesn't have cans comment. We've got Kamaru Usman getting his Twitter account hacked on fight night. Is a little bit funny, and then once his bank information got put out, it started to get a little bit worrisome. But I'll recap that whole situation. There was some controversy around disclosed pay numbers. So heading in, Conor was talking about how he thought he was going to make 80 million on this fight. Cowboy was talking about he was making a few million, and then the disclosed pay numbers came out, and Conor was at 3 million, and Cowboy was at 200 and 200. And a lot of people were like, well, how is Cowboy only getting 200 and 200 given all he's done for the company and how big this fight is? I think a lot of people were taking the numbers too literally. So I'll talk about that whole that whole situation and how a lot of people were overreacting to it. I believe we've also got Dillon Danis, a couple little stories about him or a couple little topics about him. So one of them is that he's out of his Bellator fight that was coming up, and the other one is going to be how he was not in Conor's corner and the reason why. We've got PFL. They just completed a $50 million investment round, so they're still looking to get a lot of their money on the top line, at least by getting investment money rather than actually generating money by selling tickets or selling expensive rights for for the streaming or for the broadcast of their events. We've got a couple things that are outside of. Well, I guess first off, we'll have a bunch of MMA fights that were just announced to go through. A bunch of really big ones too, a couple title fights even. But then from there, I'll go into wrestling, the Matteo Pellicone Italy tournament where they had a bunch of top USA freestyle wrestlers going out there. So I'll recap their results and then preview the IBJJF Euros coming up after that. The Euros are like a Grand Slam tournament for Jiu-Jitsu, so it's not as big as the Worlds, it's not quite as big as Japan's, but it's right up there with Euros and Brazil Euros are like the next ones that are up there, but still a very big tournament and a really important one. So back to the top, we have Conor McGregor getting back in the win column with a 40-second TKO of Cowboy Cerrone. Very short fight, so I guess I can just kind of recap what happened. So Conor comes in, throws a straight left right off the bat. Cowboy ducks it and kind of looks as though he's like trying to take a shot off of it and go for a takedown. But Conor, as he was rushing in, his left leg kind of came back and his thigh ended up cracking Cowboy in the head. So it sort of like stuffed the momentum of his shot. So then Cowboy kind of went up from there and went into a clinch. While clinched, Conor used his left hand to block Cowboy's right bicep, so he was keeping Cowboy from punching with that arm. He had an overhook on the other side to stop Cowboy's left arm, so he was taking away punches and elbows on both sides. He had good head position where he was kind of pushing Cowboy's head off at an angle, which sort of messed with Cowboy's posture, made it tough for him to land knees from the clinch. So Cowboy's offense was taken away there, and during that process, Conor started to sort of like leap into him with some shoulder strikes. Obviously, they did some cosmetic damage. I'm not sure whether or not they rocked Cowboy, but definitely did enough to bust up his nose and looked like it even like hurt his eye a little bit too. But after a few of those, they end up breaking up from the clinch. Cowboy throws a head kick. Conor blocks it, but still, it hurts to block a Cowboy head kick. But then right off of that head kick, Conor throws his own, gets right over the top of the guard of Cowboy Cerrone. Didn't land super clean in that it was mostly the foot that landed. It wasn't like a clean shin land, or it was like a clean shin that hit. But even still, you can definitely hurt a guy with that. Obviously, Cowboy was hurt with it. Cowboy was stumbled. And then as he was stumbled, Conor was able to land a few shots against the fence to drop him. Cowboy just kind of turtled up into a shell, sort of similar to how he ended up getting finished by Darren Till, where it's clear that he wasn't fighting back and he was just kind of waiting for the ref to get in there. Herb Dean, who had been getting a. The thing with Herb Dean, I guess a lot of people they remember the most recent call that they think was bad. So there was a time when Herb Dean, people would just kind of like call him Herb, let him die Dean. Then there were some fights like the Ben Askren versus Robbie Lawler fight where Herb Dean stepped in a little bit early, or there was the Aspen Ladd situation where she was trying to blame it on like gender discrimination. So I guess some people thought that Herb was going to stop this fight early. Herb definitely did not stop this fight early. He gave Cowboy some time to change his mind from just curling up into a ball to actually trying to improve position, but Cowboy continued to curl up into a ball and defend, and eventually Herb had to step in 40 seconds into the fight, and Conor got the win. So effectively, that's how the fight went. So I guess the next question becomes, what's next for Conor, and then also for Cowboy, is this just another example of him choking? I'll start with Conor first, and then get to Cowboy second. So for Conor, this was a point that I was bringing up a little bit before the fight, and it's definitely the case now. But before the fight, the idea of Conor jumping ahead of Justin Gaethje for a title shot was just absurd. No one would even think of it. They were just like, no, this is ridiculous. Just because he's a bigger star doesn't mean he deserves it, especially coming off of a win over Cowboy, especially when Gaethje just beat Cowboy. My point was that Gaethje's fought 6 times in the UFC. If you look at his last 6 fights, or his entire span in the UFC, he's 4-2. His 4 wins were Cowboy. He beat Edson Barboza, he beat James Vick, and then he also beat Michael Johnson. And then the 2 losses were Eddie Alvarez and Dustin Poirier, who both happen to be guys who Conor has beaten in the past. For Conor, now with this win over Cowboy, he is also 4-2 in his last 6 fights. For Conor, he has wins over Cowboy now. He has a win over Eddie Alvarez, who of course beat Justin Gaethje. He has a win over Jose Aldo, and he has a win over Nate Diaz. And then his 2 losses were Diaz and Khabib. So if you're looking at quality of losses, you could argue that Conor has higher quality of losses, especially with Khabib being in there. For quality of wins, you could also argue Conor has a higher quality of wins. But the fact that Conor just beat Cowboy and beat him in a more impressive fashion than Gaethje did, which is pretty tough because Gaethje definitely dominated Cowboy as well. It's sort of at a point now where if you're arguing just based off of like what's been done in the octagon, I would. You probably still have to make the case that it's Gaethje because he actually has the consecutive wins, where Conor's just at 1 right now. Conor never defended his lightweight title, so he won the title, lost it in his first defense. Typically, if you win your title, lose in the first defense, and then the first fight after that's a win, you're probably not going to get a title fight right away. Obviously, with Conor and the money he draws, he can definitely get that. But right now, if you're just arguing from a pure sports standpoint, or if you're, I guess not pure sport, but from a meritocracy standpoint, I guess, in terms of what's accomplished inside the cage, the fact that Justin does have those 3 wins together, that does kind of help. But with that being said, I don't know how you can look at their 2 resumes and say that one resume is just way better than the other one. And the fact that Conor is now 4-2 in his last 6, just like Gaethje, and the fact that he has a dominant win over Cerrone, just like Gaethje, even a more dominant win, you could say, it definitely eases the case for him, where if you are going to put him in a title fight, you don't really have to answer to too many people who are like, oh, well, he doesn't deserve it because this other guy deserves it. There are going to be plenty of people who make that case that Gaethje deserves it a lot more. You could argue that Gaethje maybe deserves it more in the octagon. I can see that, but it's not clear as day right now. It's not like Gaethje just is so much more deserving than Conor based off of his recent fights relative to Conor's recent fights. So I think for that case, that's definitely part of the reason why Dana White was eager to talk about Conor McGregor having a title fight against Khabib Nurmagomedov next. Obviously, with Khabib and Tony scheduled to fight, we might be a little bit early on that if Tony does win that fight, and if Tony makes it to that fight and Khabib makes it to that fight. Does Conor want to take a non-title fight against Khabib? Does Conor want to forget about Khabib for now, take Tony, and then if he beats Tony, then give Khabib a rematch? Like, I don't know how Tony Ferguson plays into this, but right now, with Khabib being the champion, with him still going to be the champion for the next 3 months, I think a lot of eyes are on that Conor versus Khabib fight. It seems like that's the one that he wants. Conor really didn't call anyone out specifically. He was talking about a few different guys, but it didn't seem as though he was begging to fight George Masvidal right now, which at least from a pay-per-view standpoint, you would think either that or Khabib. Those would be the biggest fights you could make. The biggest non-Khabib fight you can make, obviously, is the Masvidal fight. He really wasn't showing a ton of interest in that fight, though. The Usman fight, I'd rather not see him get a welterweight title fight right off of a win over Cowboy, even if it was an impressive win. It doesn't sound like that's something that he's interested in either. It seems as though the big goal for him is to get that win back against Khabib, or I guess to take that loss off his record against Khabib. I mean, it's not like you take it off, but at least to avenge the loss. So for him, it seems as though what he wants is he wants to be in a position where if Tony Ferguson gets injured and pulls out of that fight with Khabib, that Conor can slot himself right in. It seems like Dana White's interested in that. The question is going to be, what does that actually mean for him from a scheduling standpoint? He was talking about how on Tuesday he's gonna like have a glass of whiskey with Lorenzo and Dana, and they'll talk about it more then. So I guess maybe then they'll kind of figure it out. But if the idea is to wait on Tony Ferguson to get injured, that means you're not booking yourself for the next 2 to 3 months. Typically, once you're booked, you still have a couple months beyond that to get ready for a fight. And if that fight falls through, then what happens next? So I think at this point, what probably makes the most sense given his interest is to get himself signed to fight a lightweight, either probably not on that card because then he wouldn't be the main event, and I think for him he wants to be the main event, but maybe on a card that's like a month later. So maybe like book him versus Gaethje in May, and then kind of have it known that if one of those guys falls out, that he's hopping out of camp early and he's jumping in to fight whoever remains in that big title fight. So if I had to guess what's next, that's probably where he's going to go with it. That he's probably going to book himself with a lightweight, or I mean, even if he books himself with a lightweight, I guess he could take that fight at welterweight and still be able to cut weight on fairly short notice. But he'll book himself against someone, I would assume either in May or June, be in camp and be ready to jump in if needed. That'd probably make the most sense for him at this point. As far as Cowboy, there was a lot of talk heading into this fight that Cowboy always chokes in big fights. With the loss that he had here, that talk continued. And I'm not even talking about Stephen A. Smith yet. There were definitely a lot of MMA fans who've been making the case that Cowboy's a big choker, that Cowboy doesn't win any big fights. To me, this is one of the more obnoxious arguments that I hear from MMA fans. I know Stephen A. Smith kind of echoed that argument, but then went a little bit over the top and he got just roasted for it. But if you're looking at the argument itself, in order for a Cowboy to choke in the big fights, he has to earn the big fights, and typically to earn the big fights, you have to win other big fights. So if you look at the fact that he's lost every title fight that he's had, well, he had to win something close to or something similar to a number one contender's fight for him to get that title fight in the first place. I would argue that a number one contender fight is a big fight. Main events are big fights. Fights against other top ranked guys are big fights. He's beaten multiple UFC champions. He's beaten Ben Henderson. He's beaten Eddie Alvarez. I mean, even if you look back to just this last year, like within the last 12 months, it wasn't that long ago that he had a fight against Al Iaquinta. At the time, Al Iaquinta was ranked number 4 overall in the lightweight division. And a lot of talk surrounding Al at the time was like, look, he actually put up a pretty tough fight against Khabib. He just beat Kevin Lee. If he can beat Donald Cerrone here, I mean, maybe if you give Al Iaquinta a full camp, maybe you can get a much better fight. I mean, there were some moments that he looked good in there. So there was a lot of talk heading into that fight with Cowboy, where if Al Iaquinta gets the win here, he might be getting a title fight. So definitely a big fight for Al Iaquinta. With Cowboy, once he won that fight, it put him in the top 5, and the next guy he fights is Tony Ferguson, who some people feel is the uncrowned champion. But with a win over Ferguson, it definitely would have given him a title fight. So to say that the Al Iaquinta fight isn't a big fight, I don't agree with you. But then the other thing is that like a lot of the people who will kind of downplay the Al Iaquinta fight will look at another big main event, kind of like a Darren Till or Leon Edwards fight that he lost, and be like, well, there's a big fight that he lost. So to me, it feels like every time that Cowboy wins a fight that you could argue is a big fight, people just kind of downplay it. But every time he wins a similar, or he loses a similar fight, people want to call it a big fight afterwards and say, well, there it is again. It's a big fight for Cowboy, and he loses it. Cowboy's won plenty of main events. He's beaten some very good opponents. I know at least now, Al Iaquinta doesn't look like the biggest win. I know now Ben Henderson doesn't look like the biggest win. Eddie Alvarez even now doesn't look like the biggest win. But at the time, these guys were elite. They were big fights, and he won those fights. So it's not as though Cowboy always chokes in the big fight. Has he lost in a lot of big fights? Yes, but a lot of times when you're fighting a big fight, you're fighting against an elite guy, and those aren't easy fights to win. So did he lose to RDA a couple times in some big moments? Yep. Did he just lose to Conor McGregor in a big moment? Yep. But those guys aren't easy guys to beat, and especially not with Conor, where, and I was saying this all along, and I know a lot of people were too. It's not as though I was like having a unique finding here. But if you're looking at the top 5 guys and looking for matchups that work well for Conor McGregor, McGregor's a very good boxer. He comes out very fast, and has good body work as well over the course of a fight, both with his hands and also with his kicks. And if you're looking at Cowboy Cerrone and looking at his weaknesses, oftentimes he struggles against boxers. He starts very slow and has been susceptible to taking a lot of damage to the body and having it affect him over the course of a fight. So this was a really bad matchup for Cowboy in the first place. So for him to get beaten that way, yes, it's rough to lose that quickly. And for the one strike that I guess hits would be the head kick that gets blocked. It's really not a whole lot from him there. That's not a whole lot to look at and be happy about. But if you're going to use this and say, see, this is proof that Cowboy's always been a choker. He's never been a big game fighter. I just wouldn't go that far. Has he won a title? Obviously not, but he's won plenty of fights that were absolutely big fights in the moment at the time that those fights took place. So I don't think it's fair to give him a legacy of a guy who chokes in big fights. But then building off of that, we have Stephen A. Smith, who went on the ESPN Plus post show after that fight, and then was just talking about how Cowboy was atrocious. He looked like crap out there, and just really digging into Cowboy. And a lot of fans took issue with it. So I guess the first point I would have with that is, if it's okay for someone from the MMA space to make the same exact points, you should probably get as upset with them as you are with Stephen A. Smith for making the same points. I think Stephen was being a little bit more hyperbolic than some other people, but I mean, you even had guys like Jimmy Smith, who is a really respected guy in the MMA world, who was saying fairly similar things, talking about how Cowboy's a choker, and this is another chance, another piece of proof that he just doesn't win the big fight. So first off, I guess if you have an issue with the points that Stephen A. made, I would hope that you have the same issue if it's an MMA person who's making them. Secondly, with Stephen A. Smith, while I didn't agree with his points at all, I don't mind that he was there to make them. He's a very big personality at ESPN. I know a lot of MMA fans, and even people who train and fight in MMA, they don't necessarily have backgrounds from other team sports or other big sports like the NFL or like football or like basketball or even baseball. If you do follow football, basketball, or baseball, Stephen A. Smith probably covers it a lot, or other people like him, and it's a fairly common thing for them where they kind of spit really simplified hot takes. Part of the reason why is when you think about it, for let's even look at football, for example. Football is gigantic in America. With that being said, if you tell like a pie chart where the full pie is all football fans, and then like had to guess how big the sliver was of how many of them know what a cover two defense looks like, how many of them know the difference between like a zone or a man defense, like you'd be surprised at how small that amount would be. The truth of the matter is, oftentimes when you have sports that are massively popular, a lot of fans aren't really that deep into the X's and O's. They're not going to know um, like the resume of each different player in there, so they don't know like where they played in college. They don't know what games they've won in the past. And the more simple information you can feed them, the more they kind of take it. But then also, if it's something that's big in pop culture, at least they feel like they have enough information where they can at least like talk with other people about it. So like those simplified hot takes are really popular in other sports. For MMA, if MMA is going to get to the point where it has that sort of size, an unfortunate fact is going to be most people who are going to follow MMA, just like other sports, aren't going to know the X's and O's too well. They'll kind of know the simple stuff, and simple stuff is like, well, Cowboy Cerrone choked here, or Cowboy Cerrone is just not a big game guy. Like that, those are the sort of things that people who just follow casually are going to kind of remember and are going to kind of stick with. So while I don't like the point at all, if the hope is that MMA gets to a point where it's similar to NFL in terms of popularity, where it's bringing in that kind of money, which also means that the fighters are going to therefore still be able to make a ton of money themselves, a part of that's going to be that we're going to have a lot of casuals who are going to be covering it, and also casuals who are going to be following it. Those casuals are not going to understand a whole lot about the details of the fight. They're not going to know Cowboy's resume. They're not going to know who he's fought in the past. They're not going to, not only are they not going to know the names, but they're not even going to know like what those fighters had accomplished either. Like if you told Stephen A. Smith, oh, well, remember when he beat Ben Henderson, remember when he beat Ali Quinta, like you'd probably get a blank face from him. But with that being said, a lot of fans are gonna, or a lot of casual fans are gonna kind of be in a similar boat. So for Stephen A. Smith, if you're really into MMA and you watch Stephen A. Smith, like Stephen A. Smith only covers MMA on the big fights, and he does it for a very short period of time. Like you're gonna have plenty of, if you're really interested in MMA, there's plenty of information out there for you to get. A lot better information out there for you to get, and you'll just kind of see Stephen A. for what he is, which is just kind of like a more casual talking head that has a lot of popularity. So if you're a hardcore fan, should you be that upset about Stephen A. Smith covering it? I don't think so. I don't see the harm in it if you, again, like I said, if you follow MMA closely already, it's not as though Stephen A. Smith is going to be like a big thought leader for you and it's going to change your mind. But if you don't follow him and you do recognize Stephen A. Smith and maybe you follow some other sports, and like, oh, hey, now Stephen A. is talking about this, maybe now I'm interested. Though his takes may not be the best, and though it may be annoying if you go to work on Monday and then you have some people regurgitating his talking points and it just drives you nuts. I think in the end of the day, if he gets some people interested in MMA, they're not going to just only look at Stephen A. Smith's takes on MMA. He doesn't do enough takes on MMA. They'll kind of take Stephen A.'s takes and then go beyond that and start looking into some other people. Maybe look into Ariel, maybe look into like a Luke Thomas, look into someone else, and eventually they'll find themselves getting better information and be able to build off of it from there if that's something that they're interested in. So don't really mind that Stephen A. is there. Don't like his take, but that's kind of the game that he plays. So I'm really not all that upset about it. Like it just kind of is what it is. Next thing to go through is going to be the entire card rundown on UFC 246. So obviously we talked about Conor and Donald. Next fight that happened was Holly Holm versus Raquel Pennington. Oh my God, not a very exciting fight at all. I think the biggest thing that I took from this fight is that I think Holly Holm is at a point right now where you could argue that she's a shot fighter, and the reason I say that is her entry into MMA was as a boxer. It was the 17-time world boxing champion. I feel like a lot in recent fights, and it was really noticeable in the Amanda Nunes fight. And I kind of just figured that was just because it was Nunes, and Nunes hits really hard. But it feels as though Holly Holm's at a point in her career right now where she's really not comfortable throwing punches, especially not throwing multiple punches together. Seemed to be a little, or really hesitant to throw the left hand. And it seems like a lot of what she's doing right now is just trying to keep the range with her kicks and just keep it out of boxing range because she's worried about getting clipped in the midst of an exchange. And in this fight, she was just extremely cautious. Really wasn't eager to throw much with her hands. Was throwing a few jabs here and there to try to keep the range. The left hand really wasn't fired off a whole lot. Was doing a lot of clinching, just kind of holding Raquel up against the fence. But for the most part, the strikes we were seeing out of Holly Holm were just kind of like those cheap little kicks at the knee, a couple jabs here or there to keep the range, and then oftentimes she would just kind of close in, hold up against the fence, and just do enough to win the rounds. But very boring fight. Put a lot of people to sleep. And I mean, I guess going forward from here, as long as Amanda Nunes is the champion, I don't know that anyone wants to see Holly Holm get a rematch, especially given how the first fight went. Holly wasn't eager to exchange punches with her. Wasn't very effective with her kicks and ends up getting a head kick knocked out. As far as Raquel Pennington goes, she's just looked pretty rough ever since that loss to Amanda Nunes this fight. I don't think she looked quite as bad. It was just more so that she wasn't very effective in the clinch, and Holly kept clinching up with her. And I mean, anytime you're fighting Holly, even if Holly is appearing a little bit gun shy, she's still a very good counter fighter, so you don't want to rush in too recklessly. So it wasn't a great performance from Raquel, but it wasn't like one where I feel like she just is a shot fighter. Whereas with Holly, I'm a little bit more concerned that her lack of confidence in her punches, and in particular with her left, is going to be an issue for her moving forward. But I guess with either of them, I guess Holly Holm, you probably find someone else for her to fight in the meantime, but definitely not a title fight for Raquel Pennington. Uh, though a loss to Holly isn't great, it's not as though it's going to knock her out of the top 15, so she'll still have some ranked fighters to fight. Now, with that being said, she's 10-9 now, so losing another one, all of a sudden you're a 500 fighter, so that's not exactly great. But to me, this fight was sort of a weird one where it's not as though the winner was going to put themselves in a great position for a title fight, given that they both lost to Nunes anyway. But the way that it went, definitely neither of them are looking at title fights anytime soon. But before that, we had Alexia Oleinik versus Maurice Green. Green looked a lot better on the feet than Oleinik did, but anytime Oleinik would start to grapple with him, Green just did not do a very good job of separating. Went for a couple different Kimuras to try to defend against Oleinik's takedowns, and those were completely ineffective, and ended up getting put down multiple times. Oleinik very close to getting like a sort of like a scarfold chest compression submission, which isn't all that common. I know the most famous example would be Josh Barnett versus Dean Lister. But it looks as though he's pretty close a few different times with Maurice Green, but I guess Green had enough space there to make it through. Gets on to the second round. Oleinik's looking like crap, but eventually he's able to get the fight to the ground again. Goes for an armbar. Sort of, I mean, I guess for him, you have different preferences for how you want to finish it. I think he had a chance to finish it a little bit quicker than he ended up doing. But he was sort of in a weird position up against the fence where I guess his grip was tight enough where Green couldn't completely escape from there. But Green actually was able to get his knee in and sort of use that to fight off against Oleinik's leverage. But Oleinik made an adjustment, was able to finish it or was able to get one arm around rather than trying to use both. But by using the one arm, he was able to kind of take it off the knee, get his leverage to get the break on the arm, and then he went for the submission from there and was able to get the tap. So Oleinik gets the win. He's now 58-13. I don't know that anyone really sees Oleinik as a future title contender. Oftentimes when he fights the top guys, he struggles. His striking isn't all that great. Pretty good grappling, definitely really dangerous on the ground, but there are a lot of other really good guys out there in the heavyweight division, one of which is Fabricio Verdum, who called him out right after the fight. If that's the fight we get, that'd be a really exciting fight. With that being said, if Verdum looks anything like the Verdum we've seen in the past, Verdum would just mop the floor with him on the feet, and if it goes to the ground, then you have Oleinik from top of Verdum's guard versus Verdum from bottom of Verdum's guard, and I would go advantage Verdum on that. Oleinik's a very good grappler, but Verdum is extremely high level, so if that's a fight that he takes, can't see him winning it. I mean, granted, it's heavyweight, it doesn't take much to win one of those fights, it just takes one punch oftentimes. Though Oleinik's kind of got some sloppy technique, he's more than capable of winning that fight, but you would have to figure he'd be at least like a 4-1 underdog in that. Fight before that, we had Ode Osborne versus Brian Kelleher. Osborne was being hyped up quite a bit coming off the Contender Series, but this fight didn't go terribly well for him. Kelleher, after looking pretty rough at the start and taking a few hard shots, Kelleher was able to go for sort of like a semi-mounted guillotine, where he was kind of like going up against the fence, ends up going back to his back, going arm in on the guillotine, ends up getting the finish where Osborne has to tap with his foot. So for Kelleher, he was on a 2-fight losing streak. Probably was going to be cut if he lost this fight, but he gets the win. For Osborne, he'll still be around. It's obviously his debut, and from there, you're oftentimes not going to get cut right away, especially when they're trying to build you up and put you on a main card like this one. But for him, the hope would be that he gets the win here and he's really able to build off of it and gain some momentum. So really big wasted opportunity for him. For Kelleher, good for him, and that's definitely going to keep him around a little bit longer. I don't know where his ceiling is in the bantamweight division. He's had some tough opponents. He's had some less tough opponents. I don't know that I ever see him get to the point where he's going to be ranked, but at least he's able to stick around and keep making some UFC paychecks. So good for him there. And for Osborne, talented fighter, but he's going to have to make some adjustments here to make sure this kind of stuff doesn't happen again. And the first fight on the card, which probably should have been the co-main event, was Diego Ferreira versus Anthony Pettis. Ferreira, it's just sort of weird to watch him because when he's on his feet, he's not like super technical. Like, he's definitely improving over time, but it's not like you look at him like, wow, that's a really high level striker there. Like, he's a decent striker, but I guess with the threat of the takedown, it definitely stifles his opponents and sort of limits what they can do, and that definitely helps him be a lot more effective. But Pettis wasn't super duper effective on the feet here. Had a couple good shots that landed here and there, but eventually he was taken down. Was able to survive in the first round, but got taken down again in the second round. I think Diego Ferreira may have injured his knee in the process there. But then while he was on top, eventually sort of like gets a modified back position with the fence there as well. Gets the choke. It wasn't quite underneath the chin, but if you think about how a choke actually works, the way that the choke works is that you're blocking off both carotid arteries. The carotid arteries aren't like directly underneath like the bottom of your chin. They're kind of more off to the side. When you're underneath the chin, obviously you can get a tighter squeeze around the neck as a whole, and that definitely makes the choke a lot tighter. But sometimes you can not be under the chin but still be able to get the choke. And sometimes it can just be an angle thing. And from there, it looked as though his forearm had definitely covered one of the carotid arteries. And it seemed like with where the fence was, he was able to kind of drive his shoulder down and cover the other one. So some of the people I was with were like, wait, that was under the chin. I think Pettis just kind of tapped a little early and sort of gave up there. I didn't really see it that way. I think the choke actually was like a legit tight choke there where he had pressure on both carotid arteries and was able to squeeze enough and force the tap there, or else Pettis probably would have gone out. So for Pettis, it's kind of tough because I think now he's 9-9 in the UFC. There was a time when he was on the Wheaties boxes and he was the UFC champion, and it was kind of like, well, who's going to beat this guy? We had Gilbert Melendez coming in from Strikeforce, and he looked great in Strikeforce, but then he comes over to fight Pettis and gets guillotined, so it's like, shit, Pettis is dangerous off his back, so if you take him down, you got to deal with his guard. You got to deal with his guillotine before you even get him down, and then on the feet, obviously, he's really dangerous. But over time, just a lot of different types of fighters have found ways to beat him. And in this case, you have a guy in Ferreira who's got pretty good striking, but just a very high level jiu-jitsu black belt, and once he was able to get him to the ground, he had the edge there and was able to take advantage of that and use it. So for Pettis, where he goes from here, I mean, I would imagine he's probably still going to be ranked. I know Ferreira is most likely going to be ranked now with a win over Pettis. So Pettis is still going to be a guy who you can put against some other ranked fighters, but it seems as though he's kind of getting to a point now where after that win over Wonderboy, you're like, oh, maybe he's a couple fights away from getting a title fight, and you kind of have this redemption story. I think at this point he's starting to fit into that gatekeeper role. But I guess maybe you look at Jorge Masvidal from 2019. He was sort of in that gatekeeper role himself and put together 3 really strong wins, and all of a sudden now he's likely to earn himself a title shot. I guess Pettis is one of those guys where even if he is in a gatekeeper role now, if he does string together a few wins, it wouldn't take much for him to earn his way back to the top of the division. So I guess at least for him, that's going to be good. But this definitely isn't the kind of result that he wanted. For Hera, it's huge. Obviously now that he's going to be ranked. He'll have a lot of really good opportunities up ahead of him. We'll see what they do with him next. Maybe put him up against Islam Makhachev. That would be a pretty good fight. Makhachev's busy. Now, granted, with Ferreira, when he was limping after the fight, if he actually does have a knee injury, you're probably going to want to give Makhachev someone else in the meantime. But if it's not as serious as it looked, then that could be a really interesting fight that they can make from here. On the prelims, we had Roxanne Modafferi versus Macy Barber. Before this fight, my take on this was that the odds were absurd, that there was no reason that it should have been 10-1 favorite for Macy Barber. I felt that Modafferi was a better fighter, but that Barber was a much better athlete. And with that being said, I figured even though Modafferi is a better fighter, her striking isn't like significantly better. Didn't imagine that her wrestling would be good enough for her to take Macy down with a panic shot. In the first round, ends up getting in a body lock after landing a couple nice straight punches. I was really surprised that Barber wasn't able to defend that, though. It wasn't the cleanest takedown technique, but it was effective enough for Modafferi. So Modafferi gets on top and was able to work from top for much of the rest of the round. Although she did get reversed a couple of times, or at least one time, as far as I remember. But I guess the thing here is it was frustrating to watch because both from Macy Barber's standpoint and also from Modafferi's standpoint, you kind of expected a lot more out of both of them. Modafferi's been in this game for over 15 years. Grappling has been her primary skill set. She still hasn't earned her black belt in jiu-jitsu, and when you watched her in that fight, it makes sense why she hasn't been given it yet. Her guard passing just wasn't very good. There were a lot of openings where she could have passed Macy's guard. She was able to pass it a few times over the course of a fight, but the openings were there for much longer prior to her actually doing it. Her control from top definitely could have been a lot better. Given all the time that she had, you'd figure she'd had time to settle into mount or settle into back and be able to get her finishes. A lot of opportunities where there were chances for her to finish, and she wasn't able to do so. As for Macy Barber, her guard just didn't look very good. Didn't look like she knew what to do positionally, especially from bottom of half guard. Wasn't necessarily fighting for underhooks or trying to fight it and get back up to her side. So at least within the first round, this is at least prior to the injury, just didn't look very good for Macy Barber in terms of her being able to fight off of her back. And then for Roxanne Modafferi, just didn't look super dominant from top either. But they go back to their corners, and it's at least my understanding, according to Duke Rufus, that during that first round, Macy Barber did injure her knee, so the injury had happened during that round. So they go back out for the second. Roxanne lands a really, really light jab. And then as Macy's stepping backwards, her knee gives out, she falls down, and then ends up fighting off of her back for much of the second round. Between the second and the third round, you have this really weird moment where a doctor just goes up there and kind of rubs her knee and is like, oh, it's just a partial tear, she's fine. Which is sort of weird. I don't know how you can just feel that and know that there's a partial tear or not. I mean, maybe, I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I wouldn't know what exactly he was feeling for. You would figure that in most cases you'd actually need like an MRI for that. But regardless, it was sort of a weird little moment there. But then she goes back out, gets put down again, and then another round where Roxanne wins from top. So Modafferi gets the unanimous decision win there. As far as how to look at both fighters moving forward from here, I mean, Modafferi, you get a win over Macy Barber, like that's definitely good for her. She'll probably be a fight or two away from a title fight, especially in a division as thin as 125 is right now. So for her, it's definitely good. It's putting her pretty close to title contention again. I don't know that she'll actually make it through, but that's going to do a lot for her, especially on a really big card. For Macy Barber, she was talking about how she wanted to be the youngest champion ever. I was talking about how her skill set doesn't match that. That definitely showed through in this fight, but then also with that knee injury, you're going to figure that she's going to be out for a while as well, so it's definitely going to screw with her in terms of being able to get back in the cage and string together enough wins where she's actually going to earn a title fight in time for her to still be eligible for that record. So that definitely hurts her there. But more concerning for Macy Barber, I think, is that a person like Roxanne Modafferi, who athletically just isn't on her level, is able to use her techniques and overcome Macy's. For Macy Barber, her striking, though there's power there, there's definitely a lot of openings there to land on her, and Modafferi was finding those. Her grappling, oftentimes when we've seen her grappling, it's been because she's knocked someone down, she's been on top of a hurt fighter and been able to finish from there. But even like her debut against Cyphers, when she knocked her down, there were a couple different opportunities for Cyphers to submit her there where she was making a couple different minor mistakes where Barber was able to get out of there. One of them was off of a leg lock attempt where she ended up getting herself leg dragged, and then from that leg drag position, Barber was able to finish with a ground and pound. So for Barber, this kind of shows that her skills aren't where they need to be. The athleticism there, which is definitely a good thing for her, especially in a division where a lot of fighters lack it. But the skills are definitely going to have to improve a lot before she starts looking at a title fight. This showed it, unfortunately for her, with the knee injury being the case. How much jiu-jitsu are you going to be able to do as you're recovering from this injury? Not much. How much wrestling are you going to be able to do as you're recovering? Not much. Striking, I mean, you might be able to do some boxing here and there as long as you're just kind of doing more straight back and forth movements. So I guess you can probably return to some kind of training if it's a full tear, if it's a tear that's going to take a lot of time. At least like in a couple months, you could probably at least do some basic stuff, but the skills obviously need improvement. The knee injury is going to slow her down from improving, and this whole idea of her being the youngest champion, I think a lot of people are at a point now where they're like, yeah, this probably isn't going to happen after all. But before that, we have Tariq Yusuf versus Andre Fili. Went to a unanimous decision, 2 rounds to 1 to Sadiq Yusuff. Some pretty interesting grappling exchanges in the first couple of rounds. Both guys had some good opportunities there to get in positions where they may be able to find a finish, but neither were able to do so. In the striking, Sadiq seemed to tire out as the fight went on, and feel he was landing a little bit more on him, but Yusuff was able to build up just enough of a lead early on to take this fight here. But for Sadiq Yusuff, he's a pretty good fighter. He's definitely got a lot of power in his hands. He's a solid grappler on the ground. Pretty decent purple belts. Obviously has some good attacks there. I think one of the one of the funnier things they're mentioning his purple belt is that if you're watching that fight and you're looking in his corner, you would see Lloyd Irvin in there. I think I'm just going to mention that now, so when we get back to the press conference in Conor, that's top of mind. But with that being said, good fight from him. Decent power. Wasn't like the most dominant technical striker, but he's still pretty good on his feet. Decent on his back. But I think a lot of people they see these graphics where they've got Kamaru Usman and Israel Adesanya on there, and like, oh wow, look at Nigerian fighters, they're doing so well, and they sort of lump Sadiq Yusuff in just because he comes from the same country. Sadiq's a good fighter, but I don't think it's fair to lump him in with a Kamaru Usman or with a Israel Adesanya. And I think if you're looking at that and you're thinking, wow, Sadiq's going to be just like him in a year or two, he's going to be finding himself in title fights or in top contender fights. I definitely wouldn't go that far. He's a good fighter, but I don't know that I see him like cracking into the top 10 or really beyond that. At least at this point, he's definitely got some more improvements to make in his game. But he's still a young fighter. He still definitely has time to do that. But I just don't see him being a guy who is at that level now, but just hasn't had the opportunities. Fight before that, we had Tim Elliott versus Askar Askarov, which was just an absolutely fantastic fight at flyweight. Both guys were throwing wild at each other. Elliott's awkward style was sort of cost him early on, where he was taking a lot of hard right hands from Askarov. Looked as though he was out on his feet at one point. But Askarov definitely won the first round. Second round, Elliott was looking pretty good. Threw him a few times. Was working a couple different chokes, but really wasn't ever able to get underneath the chin or really get enough pressure to make up for that. And then in the third round, Askarov had a bit of a better round there and ended up winning the fight there on all three judges' scorecards, 30-27, 30-27, and then a 29-28, which I think is more in line with what I saw there. And then we had Drew Dober versus Nasrat Haqparast. In my preview last week, I was saying that this is not an easy matchup for Nasrat, that Dober's an excellent striker himself. I figured that this fight would probably be won in boxing range, and it probably would have been won by Haqparast. I was wrong about who would get him there. Dober was actually able to win in a boxing range, landed a huge left hand, dropped Haqparast, and then was able to finish him on the ground. Ref gave Nasrat a little bit more time than he probably should have to recover there, but in the end, Drew Dober gets the win. But Dober, he's a giant lightweight. He's a very good kickboxer. So for him having this matchup with Haqparast, who's really done a lot of good for himself just in terms of his striking, you figure this would be a fight that would be done on the feet for the most part. And if you're having a fight with Drew Dober at lightweight, even if you're a great striker, the guy's dangerous. He's really big. He's really strong. Very good technically too. So that's definitely a risk that can happen, and that is exactly what happened. So Dober gets the win here. Really big win for him. For Haqparast, I think with him, he's another one of those guys that people were looking at where he might be a few fights away from being ranked, and then a couple more fights beyond that from earning a title fight. This definitely slows down that momentum, but it just was a pretty tough stylistic matchup for him, and unfortunately for him, he got caught early. Then on the prelims, we had Alexa Kamer versus Justin Ledet. Kamer wins this fight on all three judges' scorecards. And then Sabina Mazo with a split decision win over JJ Aldrich. So I guess that'll cover UFC 246 for now, although there are a lot of topics that sort of bleed over that I'll get back to. But next thing to talk about right now is going to be the upcoming fights that are coming up in Raleigh, North Carolina. We have UFC Fight Night, Curtis Blaydes versus Junior Dos Santos. That's going to be the main event. Bit of an interesting matchup here in that it's been a while since we've seen a guy go up against Junior Dos Santos who's just going out there trying to take him down. You would figure that as long as this fight stays in boxing range, the advantage is going to be to Dos Santos. Now, Dos Santos, in some ways, has some similarities to what I was talking about with Holly Holm, where Dos Santos has seemed a little less than eager to get into too many long boxing exchanges. Oftentimes doesn't string any more than 2 punches together at a time. With that being said, at heavyweight, that hasn't always been the worst thing for him, and going up against some guys who aren't super technical, he's been able to still find his shots, even if he's not throwing multiple shots at a time. So for him, he's gotten to a point now where I think he's ranked in the top 5 right now, so things are still looking good for him. But I just don't know with Curtis Blaydes if his game plan is going to be to just kind of throw a couple of shots here and there to keep Dos Santos defensive and then just try to use that to shoot him for a takedown, or if he's just going to try to shoot him from space and risk getting clipped on the way in. But either way, if you can slip the first shot from Junior Dos Santos because of the fact that he's not throwing it as much on as he used to, it's probably going to be a little bit easier to get in on a shot than it would be on some other guys who are more keen to throw multiple punches at a time. So I'd figure, with that being the case, that Dos Santos is probably going to land a couple times on Curtis Blades, but Blades is going to be able to time one of those shots, get in, and then once he gets in on a shot, probably be able to finish one or two. And if he gets on top, it'd be interesting to see how it goes from there. Dos Santos used to be really tough to take down, really hard to keep down. Typically, you don't lose too much in the grappling, so it'd be interesting to see how Dos Santos fights off his back. He's a black belt. But if he is trying to play guard against Curtis Blades, that'd be a really bad idea. Blades is really good ground and pound, especially with the elbows. But if he just kind of works it where he's just trying to work his way back up to his feet, it'll be interesting to see how that battle works between Dos Santos working his way back up to his feet and Blades trying to keep him down. So, a really compelling matchup there. I probably see more ways for Curtis Blades to win, but again, with Curtis Blades, his boxing has always been an issue for him. And while Dos Santos isn't going to string a ton of punches together, he's still pretty accurate and he still knows when to counter. So, Dos Santos definitely has a shot at this one. Probably leaning towards Blades, but I guess that's why you watch the fights, because you never know what's going to happen. But before that, we have Rafael Dos Anjos versus Michael Chiesa. Really interesting matchup. You would figure that this should heavily favor Dos Anjos, though. On the feet, RDA should definitely have the advantage. Chiesa's going to be pretty long, but RDA is a much better technical striker. On the ground, Chiesa's dangerous. He definitely has some high-level submissions in his game. But RDA is a better overall grappler. So for RDA, he could try to keep this fight on the feet the entire time, and I think he'd be more than happy to and be able to win the fight that way, or he can try to take the fight down and just kind of play heavy and slowly work to pass Chiesa's guard in advanced position, and I think he'd be successful doing that as well. So Chiesa, he's a well-known fighter. He's definitely a dangerous grappler. If you get a little lazy with your shots, you can definitely get caught in a choke. Definitely knows what he's doing pretty much in all positions on the ground, but you should figure that this matchup really favors RDA, and it's one that he should win. The odds right now are minus 250 for RDA and plus 200 for Chiesa. Even at minus 250, you probably could. It's probably worth your time to bet on RDA regardless, or maybe at least put him in a parlay. Fight before that, we have at flyweight with Jordan Espinosa and Alex Perez. Both guys, I believe, are ranked right now, so that should be a good fight for them. We've got Hannah Cifers versus Angela Hill. I guess I don't know that either of these girls are ranked, but probably shouldn't expect too much out of that fight. You got Jamal Hill versus Darko Stosic. I think Hill's coming off of the Contender Series. Stosic's been around for a little bit. Then on the prelims, we have Bavon Lewis, who coming into the UFC looked like he was going to be problems for a lot of people. Even in his loss to Uriah Hall, he was dominating Uriah Hall prior to getting knocked out late. And then in his last fight, he also ended up having a pretty bad performance. He'll be going up against Daquan Townsend. We've got Arnold Allen going up against Nick Lentz, who is a late replacement. Justine Kish versus Lucy Pudilova. Montel Jackson, who's always interesting, gigantic bantamweight, really long arms, really good wrist control. It'll be interesting to see how he does against Felipe Corrales. We've got Sarah McMahon returning against Lena Landsberg. Brett Johns versus Tony Gravelli. And then Herbert Burns versus Nate Landwehr. Herbert Burns is the younger brother of Gilbert Burns. Not anywhere near as good of a striker, but still pretty dangerous in his grappling, so we'll see how he does. So now we can kind of go back to some UFC 246 topics. So the one we're going to get to right now is the press conference that was done on Wednesday. So a little context prior to that, there was the Ariel Helwani interview that had aired on Monday of Fight Week, and during that interview, Ariel had mentioned the sexual assault allegations, and we'd gotten an answer from Conor, and that answer was pretty much like, look, all I can give it is time right now. There's really nothing I can say because of the way the situation is, given that it's a legal situation. So he's just like, yeah, just wait for time, let time heal and clear me up. Then it was brought up that there was an allegation that he was the mother of a child to another woman, and that those allegations had been taken care of, and it had shown that he was not, and he was innocent of that. So he kind of like built off of that. I was like, yeah, you know, kind of same type of situation here. Like all I can do is wait for my name to be cleared. So given that it's a legal situation, you know, Conor's not going to say much about it. We had the answer there. It's clear that he wanted to say more, but he really couldn't. So you know, if you ask him again, same type of situation is going to happen. Now, granted, heading into fight week, there were a lot of MMA media members who were talking about, oh, well, all these MMA media members, they're not going to say anything. They're not going to ask him about the sexual assault allegations. I wish we had a media that would do that. And to start the week, you have Ariel Helwani, who a lot of people look at as a shell, who's doing that right off the bat. But given that they spent so much time just patting themselves on the back and talking about how important it is to ask about these sexual assault allegations, they still felt the need to do it, even though Ariel already had it taken care of. And so at the press conference, you had one of these reporters who goes up there and asks about it and just gets booed by all the fans in attendance. And a lot of people are upset. They're like, why are you booing him? He's just asking about sexual assault. Do you guys really like sexual assault that much? That's definitely not the case. It's obvious that the reason that the guy was getting booed was because fans already knew the answer to it and they didn't want to hear it. And there's a lot of things to mention on this. There's a lot to go into on this, and I'll kind of dig into it and try not to get too off the beaten path on this. But first off, if you look at what this press conference is, you have Conor McGregor, you have Donald Cerrone, and you have Dana White all answering questions from the press. Donald Cerrone doesn't do a ton of interviews. Dana White doesn't do a ton of interviews. Conor McGregor almost never does interviews, and it's to the point where he's actually monetized his interviews because he does so few. So if you look at Conor McGregor, and one of the things you might have noticed prior heading into this fight is that not only was he quiet from media, didn't do like the on sale ticket press conference or anything like that, but when he finally did do some media, it was on his own website that he owns, that he gets the money from. But it was also sponsored by Paramatch, which is an offshore betting company that he already has a deal with. So for Conor, you kind of have the situation where he's making money both off of the views that the interview gets, but then also off of a sponsorship on it. But because he hasn't been doing a bunch of other interviews, people are like, oh my god, Conor finally did an interview. I want to hear what he has to say. And as a result, that's what you end up getting there, is he ends up making a bunch of money off of it. So for him, he's purposely not doing a lot of media availability. So with this pre-fight press conference, you have a very rare opportunity where it's just open to the media to actually ask Conor McGregor questions. So within that, you're going to want to have some good questions to ask him there. Donald Cerrone, as I mentioned, he doesn't answer a lot of questions. And then Dana White, again, you get some interviews with him around big fights, but it's not as though he's doing those post-fight scrums every single time he's got a fight coming up. So real big opportunity here that really feels like it was wasted by some of these media members who felt like they had their own axe to grind. You have this one where he's asking about sexual assault, where you already know the answer. You have a limited time here. You got about 30 minutes with all three of them, and you're going to waste some of that time asking a question that everyone knows the answer to. And that's one frustrating part about it, but another frustrating part about it is that the reason why he's asking it is because a lot of these other MMA media members are like, oh, no one's going to ask it, no one's going to ask it. So not only is he asking it and knowing that he's not going to get an answer, but he's doing it because he knows that when he does ask it, he's going to get applauded by a bunch of his peers. And then even on top of that, he knew that Conor wasn't going to say anything. He ends up helping out some guy at the New York Times afterwards to write an article about that answer where the headline is Conor silent about allegations. The headline Conor silent about it makes it sound as though, had you not seen the press conference, that Conor was like all joyful and happy, and then he gets asked about it, and then he just kind of like completely changes his mood as though he's like hiding something. That's not the case there. It's just like he already answered the question. Dana White was like, dude, why are you asking this? So the article itself was a garbage article. There was no value in asking that question. It was a waste of time. And then on top of that, the fact that people realize that the reason he's doing it is because he wants to be applauded by his peers. It's just like, dude, like, enough of the circle jerk bullshit. Like, do it somewhere else. We don't have time for that shit right now. So for that reason, the fans who booed him, I'm completely on board with them. I agree with booing the guy. The boos weren't because the fans or I support sexual assault. The boos were because we know what this guy's doing. We know that he's just trying to get a bunch of credit from his peers. We know that he's not accomplishing anything. We know he's going to take this non-answer that he gets and write a really shitty article about it. And so for that reason, he deserved to be chided for what he did, and I have no problem with that at all. Next topic to talk about is going to be Dana White. So I believe it was within that same press conference, he had mentioned that the UFC doesn't have professional cams, with the idea being that some people are like, look, he's been gone for a while. He needs to get back in the win column. Who's he going to fight to do that? And some people were asking, maybe Cowboy Cerrone is a little bit too tough for that. And Dana's point was like, look, in the UFC we don't do professional cams. Like if you're gonna fight in the UFC, you gotta fight the top guys. And even though, as I mentioned before, Cowboy was a very winnable matchup for Conor, what that's really saying is that in the context of the top 5 lightweights, Cowboy's not an easy fight. Even though Conor had a very easy fight in the end here, the fight went very well for him, I would say. It's not as though Cowboy is a bum or anything. Cowboy's a legit fighter. And the point that Dana White was making is like, if you're in the UFC, you're one of the top guys, and if you're not one of the top guys, you're not going to last. And a lot of people were like, oh yeah, really? Well, how about CM Punk? CM Punk is a different situation because CM Punk was brought in to sell tickets. He wasn't actually brought in as a can. If you're bringing someone in as a can, the idea is that they're going to lose to someone who you're trying to build up and have them make their way towards the top of the division or even make their way towards the title. the guys who CM Punk fought were Mickey Gall and Mike Jackson. No one was trying to build up Mike Jackson, and no one was really trying to build up Mickey Gall. Mickey Gall really hasn't gone too far since beating CM Punk. He's had some decent wins like Sage Northcutt, but he's also had some other losses that haven't been all that impressive for him. And then Mike Jackson, even after getting the win, which was kicked out of the UFC because that fight was so shitty. So, though CM Punk is not a very good fighter, though he's probably the worst fighter who's fought in the UFC, it's not as though he was brought in as a can. What he was doing was a separate thing. The can is someone who's building other fighters up. CM Punk wasn't there to build people up. He was just there to sell pay-per-views. It was a different situation there. So I actually agree with Dana when he said that they don't have cans in the UFC. I think for the most part, they have some fighters who maybe aren't the best, but it's not as though they have guys who were brought in because they suck, specifically because they suck, so they can lose. Different situation there. Next topic to talk about is going to be Kamaru Usman getting his Twitter hacked, and I'm not going to read all the tweets because, I mean, some of them were just like pure trolling and just a lot of use of the N word in there. Not even the Mike Perry N word with the A at the end, but the one with the ER. Started off, and I guess because Kamaru Usman is one of Ali Abdelaziz's fighters, people just assume that Ali was writing it. I think even after it came out that was hacked, Conor McGregor still kind of feels like Ali was behind at least the first one. Whereas like, and the idea of the tweet was that Kamaru Usman was saying that he was going to screw Conor McGregor's wife. And I guess when I read it at first, I was like, this seems a little bit far and a little bit much, but also you have a lot of fighters who are trying to stand out in Conor McGregor's mind and really do something that's going to make him want to fight them. And I guess an all F your wife type of tweet is one way to try to get someone to want to fight you. So I was like, this seems a little much for Usman, but he's one of all these guys. I could see Ali writing that, so maybe it's true. So I kind of see what Conor was thinking there, but then the tweets that went beyond that were definitely well beyond the line there. There was one where it was like a hashtag and it was like FUCK and then the N word with the ERS at the end. One of them was talking about how he was going to beat Floyd Mayweather and knock the N word out of him, like same type of thing with Mike Tyson. Like it was clear that it was just trolling. They were even like linking to some Discord page from a couple of guys, and they were even like linking to some profiles of either the hacker or someone who knew the hacker. They also had a screenshot of his bank information, which showed his different accounts, and then said they were going to give out his password as well. Eventually, it all got shut down. If Conor McGregor's idea that it was all Ali and that he did the first one and then just kind of went overboard to try to hide it, if that's the case, we're probably going to find that out eventually, because given that the bank information was involved, you're probably going to have, if not actual law enforcement, you're probably going to have some investigators hired to look into it. And if that's the case and Ali is the one who did it, I'm sure they'll be able to trace it back to him. So if that ends up being a story somewhere down the line, that'd be just a bizarre story that Ali was doing all of it and made it look like he was hacking and Ali had the banking information because he's the agent. That'd be absolutely wild if that's the case. I guess it's some kind of possibility, but if we're putting odds on this, I don't care what odds you're putting on it. I'm probably not putting any money down on Ali being behind it. But with that being said, you would hope that if the bank information was out there, that got taken care of and he didn't lose any money. I think one of the interesting things is if you looked at the screenshot that they sent from the bank information, you had a few different accounts in there. One of them was like Usman LLC, and then one of them was like a personal checking account. I'm going to mention that one again, where we're going to kind of leave that one out there and then get back to it. Especially talking about the amount of money that the fighters on the UFC 246 card made. But it's kind of interesting there that if that's actually a real screenshot, that most of the money that Kamaru Usman has in his bank accounts are assigned to a business account called Usman LLC, which you would imagine is for tax purposes. But you would also imagine that the money that was put in that account wasn't put from the disclosed pay, that there might have been some separate money that was put in that account. So I'll just kind of leave that there. But in the end, for Kamaru Usman, didn't look like he was having the most fun at UFC 246. I'm sure that's a big part of the reason why. Even if those were coming from Ali, like how much are you going to put that on Usman for having those tweets out there? I don't know. So it doesn't look like Conor's like begging to fight Usman even after the fact. It seems like he's even if he thinks it wasn't a hacker, it seems as though he's assigning it to Ali. But Ali's got plenty of clients, and for Conor, how do you take that? Does that mean that you want to fight another one of Ali's clients and beat him, or does that mean that you want to only fight Khabib and not fight any other Ali clients, to make sure that Ali doesn't get a piece of the red panty night, as he calls it? Because that would actually be pretty interesting if Conor decides that he's not going to fight any Ali Abdelaziz clients, which would take Justin Gaethje out of the running, which would take Kamaru Usman out of the running, and maybe if he just makes the one exception for Khabib, It'd be interesting if he decided to do that. If you'd have a guy like Justin Gaethje, or if you'd have a guy like Kamaru Usman, who would say, you know what, I like what I'm getting out of Ali, but if I can't get the Conor fight with Ali and I really want the Conor fight, maybe I have to go to a different agent. It'd be interesting to see if Conor tries to play that kind of hardball in the future, and if this specific situation ends up spurring that. So that could be something to watch for in the future. I don't know whether or not that's actually going to happen, but it is something that you can definitely watch for and see if it does. Next thing to talk about is what I was just mentioning before, which is that controversy around disclosed pay. So in the press conferences, Conor was talking about how he thinks he's going to make 80 million from this fight. I think he's definitely inflating that number. Even if it's sold well, I don't think the money's gonna be there for him to make that much unless he's like accounting for spikes in sales of Proper 12, because you definitely had a lot of fans who were buying their Proper 12 because Conor fought, especially after the win. So maybe if he's like accounting for all that, maybe it gets closer to that figure. But it's definitely a lot more than the $3 million disclosed pay that he was given for Cowboy Cerrone. It sounded as though he was making a few $1 million for this fight, at least in the press conference. And then when you look at his disclosed pay, it was 200 and 200. And you got a lot of people who are just looking at the disclosed pay and saying, "Well, look at MMA. Like Conor McGregor brings in so much money, and all he's making is $3 million. And Donald Cerrone's been fighting for so long, he's getting this big fight, and all he's making is 200 and 200. This clearly isn't right." I think if the fighters seem to be pretty happy with the money they're making, and they say they're making a lot more, I don't understand the reason why a fighter would go out publicly and say, "I'm making millions of dollars for this fight," and then the disclosed pay comes up being like 10% of that. Like, surely there's other money coming in that isn't on that disclosed number, whether that's money that's going to be charged to them as an individual, as an independent contractor, whether they're funneling that through an LLC. It definitely seems like that disclosed number is much smaller than what's actually there. Now, for some fighters, and I think for most fighters, the disclosed number probably is the number that they're actually getting. But for a lot of the main event fighters, it seems like they're definitely finding other ways around where the disclosed number is much smaller than the number they're actually keeping. Obviously, pay-per-view points are a big part of that. Those incentives are never really brought out to the public, but it seems as though some of the other top fighters, possibly with Usman, it seems like that could definitely be the case there if that screenshot was accurate. But then also with Cowboy and some other guys who are main eventing and getting big fights against guys like Conor, that they're sort of like setting up their own LLCs and finding other ways to get their full payment, or get their payment in full, where they're working around different tax laws. So is Cowboy Cerrone walking away with only $200,000 from this fight? Highly doubted. I'm sure he's making multiple millions of dollars for this fight. But just the disclosed pay that's going to be taxed to him at the independent contractor rate is a much smaller number. But I think he's probably got an LLC set up himself, and he'll be bringing a lot more money through there, and that money will be going straight to him. So I don't see much of an issue with here. Cowboy seemed fine with the money he was making. Conor seems more than fine with the money that he's making. So who would I be as someone who has incomplete information to argue that those guys are getting drastically underpaid when it seems as though they understand what their worth is, and they feel comfortable with the money that they're getting. So I personally don't see too much of an issue with it. Some people were, but it seems like there was an incomplete picture there, and to treat that picture as the full picture is definitely not doing yourself any service if you're trying to be accurate in what you're saying. Next topic to get to is Dillon Danis. So a couple different Dillon Danis topics. First one is going to be him being out of his fight at Bellator. When I first heard the news, I thought that was going to be sort of an extension off of what happened with ADCC, where with ADCC he ended up missing because of a really bad back injury, and sometimes back injuries take a long time to heal up. Sometimes they just don't. So there's some worry there that if it was the back injury flaring up again, that could be a really big problem for him. That could really drag him down over the course of his career, and maybe even kind of destroy it before it ever really gets going. Turns out it was a knee injury, and I think he had knee surgery on it as well. So I guess in some ways you could say that's good news, and that it's not the back constantly keeping him out of fights. But knee injuries, especially ones that require surgery, are going to take you out for quite a while as well. So with that being the case for Danis, it's unfortunate because he's only fought twice so far. His name's been in the news for quite a while, and it seems like it's going to be a while for him to come back again and get that third fight. This is going to be a really good matchup for him. He's going to be a guy who's a decent striker, but a guy who was a really good lower division college wrestler. I believe he coached wrestling as well, so it'd be interesting to see if Danis could actually get the fight to the ground and what he'd be able to do there. And if not, we'd see more from him on the feet. So it was a really interesting matchup. Kind of sad that we didn't get it. But for him, hopefully he's able to heal up, and by the time that he comes back, he's able to come back, get better, and actually be able to string together a longer run there where we can actually get an idea of how good he can actually be in MMA. Next topic relating to Dillon Danis is going to be him not being in Conor McGregor's corner. And the reason why is because he still hasn't paid the $7,500 that he owed the commission for it. I don't know what the reasoning for him not paying there is. I'm sure he has the money. I think for him, it's because he feels as though he shouldn't have to pay. If that's the case, I completely agree with him. Like, if we're looking back at, and I think I've talked about this before, closer to when they had the hearings on this, and then also when the actual fight took place, he was in a position where he was in the corner. Yes, he was talking some shit to Khabib afterwards, but here's the thing: if Khabib just kind of ignores him or just brushes him off or acts like an adult in the cage, is Dillon Danis getting suspended? There's no fucking way. Is Dillon Danis getting fined? There's no way. And if he did, that would have been absurd. The reason why he did get suspended, the reason why he did get fined, is because Khabib made the decision to jump in or jump after him and start trying to fight him. I just don't. I hate when rules are enforced in a way where one person does an action, and then if the other person does action A, then the action. So I'm trying to think of a good way to explain this because I'm probably going to chop this up a little bit. Let's just say I complete action A. If another person does action B, action A means nothing. If another person does action C, action A means that I'm responsible for something and I need to be punished. If it's the same action, if action A is the constant, but the difference is response B or response C, there's an issue there. Like I feel like if action A is a bad action, action A should get the same punishment regardless, whether or not action B happens or whether or not action C happens. So to me, this is a situation where I don't see how Dillon Danis gets in any trouble if Khabib stays in the cage like he's supposed to, but because Khabib decides to go over the top, now all of a sudden Danis is at fault. Danis needs to be reprimanded. I just don't see it. So if he's making the decision that he's not going to go back to Vegas, that he's not going to pay the fine and deal with that, kind of respect it. It sounds like Khabib's in a similar situation where he doesn't want to fight in Vegas again. In the post-fight press conference, Dana was saying that the fight between Khabib and Conor, they were talking about maybe doing T-Mobile or doing the Vegas Raiders Stadium, but they were saying, yeah, but Khabib doesn't really want to fight in Vegas, so we'll see if that's actually something that happens. So if Khabib never fights in Vegas again because he doesn't like the punishment, I think the punishment for Khabib was a little bit more fair. But I get that. If Danis doesn't want to pay Vegas ever again and wants to just fight in different places and gets put in this position where he can't corner in Vegas, is that unfortunate? Yes, but I don't know that I necessarily blame him either. But either way, I guess it worked out for Conor because he was able to take Danis' spot and put his old boxing coach in there. So for Danis, hopefully that doesn't mean that he's like slowly phasing himself out of the camp by doing that, but we'll see where it goes from there. I guess last thing to mention with Danis too is just something that I was noticing over the course of fight week. A lot of people were talking about how by having Dillon Danis in his camp, Conor McGregor is like opened up like some massive Pandora's box for jiu-jitsu, and he's gonna be able to improve so much better than he had before. Now that he actually has like a high level black belt in his camp. John Kavanaugh's a high level black belt too. I don't think people realize that. He's not hasn't had the competition success that Dillon Danis had said, obviously, but he's very competent. He knows a lot about the ground game as well. So though it helps to have Dillon Danis, especially as it helps to have him as a sparring partner, it's not as though Dillon Danis brought in like some revolutionary new jiu-jitsu that Conor didn't really have access to before. John Kavanaugh's got fantastic jiu-jitsu and has helped him out quite a bit, leading up to the point where Dillon Danis eventually entered the camp. So that's a little point that I just wanted to make sure I included here, just in case people are hearing otherwise and actually believed it. A few more points to talk about. We've got PFL. So they've completed another investment round. So for them, this is a $50 million round. Worth mentioning when you're doing investments, you have a whole pie of equity, so you have 100% of equity. After each round, obviously, the people who initially own it, they're going to sell some off to the new investors. Then you do a new round. Maybe some of the investors might want to sell out some of the equity they already have. Maybe the initial people who run the company are going to sell off more equity than they own. But each time you raise more money, you're selling off more equity, whether that's the guy who owns, or whether that's like the people who started the company, or whether that's the people who invested early. So it's just more equity being sold, and that's what happened here. So worth noting is that when you do have one of these $50 million rounds, oftentimes when you're bringing investors in and you're selling off equity, if you think that your company is on a great trajectory, if there's a lot of cash flow coming in, and if you feel like the equity that you have now is going to be worth a lot more in the future because the company is continually increasing in value, you're probably not going to want to sell off too much equity. You'd probably be more eager to get loans and to actually get investment where people are buying off equity in the company. So again, this is another equity investment for the PFL, which sort of says they didn't have all the money that they wanted to grow in their cash flow, which is a bit concerning. They didn't feel as though they were going to be able to get the loans, or that'd be worthwhile to get the loans. So to me, sort of seems like another red flag for them, where they're still trying to survive by bringing in new investors, and it seems that they're making the same pitch of well, the UFC just sold for $4 billion like a few years ago. We're similar to the UFC. We're a slightly smaller competitor. So if they're worth $4 billion, imagine what we could be worth. And I'm surprised that that pitch is still working for them up to this point. But apparently, it was enough for them to get that investment. But again, if they're going to want to last as a company, they're going to have to be able to make their own money, be able to fund what they need to fund with their own cash flow. And it seems as though a lot of what they're doing to survive right now is bringing in new investment rather than actually making money and bringing in more revenue than they're spending on their fighters and spending on all the other stuff that they're doing. So I guess for PFL, this means they'll survive a little bit longer, given that they just got another $50 million round of investment. But if we're looking at them as a business that's going to survive on its own, as a business that's going to be sustainable, has to be another red flag there. And it kind of goes back to the point where a lot of people would like to see fighters make a lot more than they make, but at the end of the day, a promoter has to bring in more money than it spends. Otherwise, it's not going to be able to survive for long. PFL is finding a way to survive by bringing in more investment money and diluting its equity, but this isn't something that's going to work for most companies, and even for PFL, it is only going to last so long. Back to the UFC, a bunch of big fights that were announced this week, as I would have figured that there would have been, given that you have a lot of attention around the Conor McGregor fight. So the fights that were announced, we have Leon Edwards versus Tyron Woodley. So that's the fight at welterweight that's been talked about for a while. Finally, we're going to get it. As far as what happens based off of who wins, it sounds like Colby's looking to come back sometime around March or May. But given that he did lose by a finish to Kamaru Usman, even if he comes back and gets a win right off the bat, I don't know if they're going to put him in a title fight right away, even though that fight with Kamaru was a really good fight. And I think it probably did decent business as well. So there's definitely a good chance that this Woodley versus Edwards fight is going to be a number one contenders fight. It seems as though Conor's not jumping into that welterweight title picture right now. It seems as though he's not fighting another welterweight right now. So if his eyes are on the lightweight division right now, you're probably going to have Kamaru versus Jorge Masvidal made. And then the winner of this Leon Edwards versus Tyron Woodley fight is likely going to be in line for a title fight after that. So effectively being a number one contender fight, that's going to be a main event out in London. Definitely one of the biggest fights that could be made, and it's a fight that was made, and can't wait for it to happen. I believe that it's going to be happening sometime around March, so hopefully everyone stays healthy, and that's a fight that we actually get. Real big opportunity for Leon Edwards to fight against a former champion, and a guy who, though he had a really bad performance up against Kamaru Usman prior to that fight, was looked at as a guy where it's like, who's going to beat this guy right now? Like, he's really good wrestling, black belt in jiu-jitsu, though it's more his top game that's effective in MMA than his bottom game. But his boxing is pretty good as well, and has a lot of power that you have to deal with for 25 minutes. So if Edwards can find a way to win, just like Usman was able to win, at that point you pretty much have to give him the title fight. If Woodley gets the win over Edwards, who was coming on an 8-fight win streak, and given how long he was able to hold on to the title, yes, it seems as though he's a pain in the ass to Dana and a lot of the other business people, but with the win there, it's tough to argue that he doesn't deserve a title fight after that. Other fights to look at, we have a report from Kambach. I don't know if this has been made completely official yet, but it seems as though that's where they're going. They're doing Henry Cejudo versus Jose Aldo in May. So Aldo coming off of a loss at featherweight, then moves down, has I believe it was a split decision loss to Marlon Moraes. Looks to be getting a title fight. I guess for Jose Aldo, good for him that he's getting a title fight coming off of 2 losses, and good for him that he's either going to get that title or he's going to lose that title fight and probably be in a position where he doesn't have to deal with this bantamweight crap anymore and can go back up to featherweight and stop eating like a starving child. So I guess in that way, good for Aldo, and that this bantamweight thing is probably going to be resolved sometime soon now. If he gets the win there, that's gonna be weird. I mean, I guess if he beats Henry Cejudo, then you can argue that he didn't deserve the fight coming off of 2 losses, but if he wins, he's the champion, so he'll stick around bantamweight as long as he needs to at that point. But if he loses, I think that would give him a good reason to go back up to featherweight if he wants to continue fighting. But as far as whether or not he deserved it, no, I don't think he did. To me, Peter Yan is the guy right now who should have had that fight. Kind of annoyed that he didn't get it. Definitely a much tougher matchup for Cejudo than Yan is, but we'll see how it goes. As far as how that matchup actually looks, I'm assuming that the Jose Aldo, who doesn't throw a whole lot of leg kicks, is going to continue to show up because that's the one that we've been getting consistently for a while. So it's going to be him and his boxing versus Cejudo. Cejudo may be able to take Aldo down at times, but Aldo's probably going to be able to spring right back up as he's done in the past. So then the question becomes, how much respect is Aldo going to give to Cejudo's wrestling while they're striking? Is he going to react a lot to the shots? And if so, is that going to open up some opportunities for Cejudo to land some big shots on the feet? That remains to be seen. But if this is a fight that's going to happen, I think stylistically, and if the fight actually happens, it's still going to be exciting to watch. You're definitely going to see ways that Aldo could possibly win. So people are going to want to watch the fight, but there are definitely guys who are more deserving. And I don't know that Aldo's going to bring in like a ton of money for it either. So from a business standpoint, I'm not sure I see why they felt the need to rush Aldo in there. And then from a competition standpoint, obviously Aldo's coming off of a loss, and you have other guys who are arguably more deserving and even better matchups for Henry Cejudo. So kind of frustrating that that's what we get here, but that seems to be the fight that they're going to make. Speaking of title fights that were announced, where the challenger is coming off of a loss, we have Yoel Romero versus Israel Adesanya. This fight was talked about for a while. They finally made it official this week. It seems as though the reason why it took this long is that there was some negotiation going on, and with Conor talking about how if he gets a quick win, he might want to fight again in March. It seemed as though that was like giving the UFC some leverage and saying, look, if you don't want to sign a deal by now, we'll see what happens with Conor, and if Conor wins a quick fight, maybe he takes that spot and we look elsewhere. But whatever the case may be, they agreed to this fight midweek. You got Yoel Romero, who's always dangerous, against Israel Adesanya, who you would figure should have the edge on the feet. Romero, as I've talked about in the past, very good wrestler, but his wrestling is more so freestyle wrestling. Once the fight hits the mat, he's not super effective. So will he be able to take Adesanya down at some point? Possibly, but is he going to be very effective once he actually gets there? That I don't know. Adesanya's dangerous off his back. He can definitely throw up some submissions. For him, sometimes he gets a little bit reckless when he throws submissions up off his back and risks giving up position. I don't know that Romero's going to necessarily make him pay if he does that, but that could be something to watch for if the fight does go to the ground. But if it does stay on the feet, Adesanya definitely has a technical advantage there. Could Romero catch him off guard, land a huge shot, and put him out? Sure, that's possible, but I would figure from a stylistic matchup that this should go Adesanya's way. But no one really gets through Romero easily, and maybe Adesanya is the first guy to do it, but there's definitely reason to believe that he won't. So can't wait for that fight. That's going to be coming up in March. We've also got Neil Magny versus Li Jingliang. So this is a lower top 15 rated welterweight fight. So Magny hasn't been back for a while, but he was sort of towards the bottom of the top 15 when he was around. Li Jingliang, decent Chinese prospect. Have a hard time thinking about him and not thinking about that fight that he had with Jake Matthews where he was gouging his eyes while he was in a guillotine. But he's put together a few good wins here and had that win over Eliseo Zaleski dos Santos, which is a good win for him. So this will be another opportunity for him to beat a name that people are familiar with and work his way up the welterweight ladder. We have Kevin Lee versus Charles Oliveira, which is a really good fight. I was hoping that we would get Kevin Lee going up against Islam Makhachev. That fight was a lot more exciting to me, and I think for Kevin Lee, if his goal right now is to work his way into a title fight as quick as possible, even though Makhachev isn't ranked all that high, if you beat a guy like Makhachev, a lot of people are going to respect it, sort of like they did with the McGregor Gillespie fight. But you also kind of have the Betch Correia Ronda Rousey angle where Betch didn't really get a ton of great wins before she got the fight with Ronda Rousey, but what she did do was she beat a couple of Ronda's closest friends and used that as a way to get into Ronda's head and be like, oh, I'm coming for you next. And it sort of created some pressure where Ronda's like, okay, screw it, I'm done with you. I'm going to fight you now, and we're going to handle this. For Kevin Lee, if he gets the fight with Makhachev and if he gets a good win over Makhachev, he can at least get Khabib on board with fighting him because he's going to want to avenge the loss of his friend. Whereas Charles Oliveira, you don't have that same situation. And then Oliveira is also, though he's a very good fighter, he isn't ranked quite as high right now. So for Lee, it's a good fight for him to keep busy, but he felt like he had some opportunities to advance himself towards the title fight a little bit quicker. Now maybe this is intentional. Maybe he wants to give himself some more time to work with Faraz Zahabi and really make sure that he's ready the next time that he's up for a title fight. Because he had that little run where he ended up having that interim fight against Tony Ferguson, and then sort of fell off from there. So maybe the concern is that if you get another run to the title again and then it doesn't work out again, how eager are people going to be to give you another shot? So maybe he's thinking next time he has another run at the title, he really wants to be ready. And right now, if he takes some fights against some tough guys who are a little bit lower ranked, that's going to give him the time that he needs to really make the improvements that need to be made. But Oliveira is going to be dangerous. His Muay Thai has improved a lot, so it'll be interesting to see what he's able to do on the feet against Kevin Lee. I don't think that he's going to be too concerned about getting taken down by Kevin Lee, whereas Gregor Gillespie was, and that sort of froze him up a bit. I don't know that it's going to be in Kevin Lee's best interest over the course of a 25-minute main event to keep going to the ground with Charles Oliveira, especially in his guard. So it'll be interesting to see how Oliveira approaches that, whether he decides that he wants to just keep the fight on the feet and take it to the ground on his own terms, or whether he's okay with Kevin Lee shooting whenever he shoots and just treating it like a straight-up kickboxing match. So we'll see how that fight goes. But if Oliveira gets the win here, which given how he's looked recently, it wouldn't shock me all that much. It'll be interesting to see where he goes from there. And one more fight to mention is Aspen Ladd and Juliana Pena. So a couple high-ranked girls at the 135 division. They'll be facing off against each other. Pena a little bit more of a grappler than Ladd, but we'll get to see that as well. Beyond that, I guess that covers it for the MMA topics right now. A few short notes, I guess, on some grappling topics I'd like to bring up. Oftentimes I bring up wrestling every week, and I also bring up jiu-jitsu when available. So for wrestling, they had a really big freestyle wrestling tournament where they had a lot of the top Americans go out there and compete. Some of the best guys in the world were out there. So I'll start at 57 kilograms. So the three Americans that went out there for that were Thomas Gilman, former Iowa Hawkeye. You had Joe Colon, former UNI Panther, and then Dayton Fix, who made the world team last year after beating Thomas Gilman. Gilman ends up winning the entire bracket. In the semis and the finals, has to face off against his teammates. So in the semis, he faces off against Joe Colon, or he faced off against Dayton Fix. Ends up winning that match by a score of 2-1. And then Fix ended up losing his backdraw match after that to a guy from China, so he ends up finishing 5th. And then Gilman in the finals goes up against Joe Colon and wins that match by a score of 4-3. So a good result there for Gilman. Obviously, with Fix already being on the team, people are looking at him as the guy to look at to make the team next year, or I guess to make the Olympic team this year. But with this loss to Gilman, and with Gilman being a guy who's beaten him in the past, it definitely puts him down in some people's minds and makes them wonder whether or not Thomas Gilman's going to be able to beat him again and earn that spot later on this year. But if he does, Thomas Gilman's won world silver before, so it's not as though he's a guy who can't do well internationally. At 65 kilograms, we had Jordan Oliver, Zane Rutherford, and Joey McKenna. So Oliver just ran through the U.S. Nationals, including a win over Joey McKenna in the finals there. Oliver looked really strong all the way up until the finals. Ended up facing off against Bajrang Punia from India. Ended up losing that match by a score of 4-3. Zane also faced Bajrang. He lost by a score of 5-4. Although it was sort of like a weird freestyle wrestling rule where he ended up giving 2 because his back was like facing towards the mat, even though he was on top of Bajrang, and ended up coming up on top in that exchange. But Zane ends up taking bronze here. And then Joey McKenna got a win early, but then lost to Bajrang. And then lost to Zane Rutherford as well in the back draw. So here, Jordan Oliver, after looking really good, it was going to be interesting to see if he ended up facing Zane Rutherford, how that match would go. That match didn't end up happening. Zane Rutherford, of course, is the guy who made the team for the U.S. this year. So we didn't get that match. Oliver did finish ahead of him, but part of that is a bracketing thing. But then Oliver, after looking as good as he did in the U.S. Nationals, it was going to be interesting to see if he could continue that. First 3 matches were great, 10-0, 4-0, 7-0. But ends up losing 4-3 to Bajrang. So Bajrang's one of the top guys in the world. Losing to him isn't necessarily a bad thing, but if the hope was that Oliver had turned over a new corner and was just ready to dominate the world, I think we can probably pump the brakes on that one right now. 74 kilograms, the winner was Kyle Dake. Just pretty much ran through the bracket. Won all 4 matches, 5-1, 10-0, 3-1, and 11-0. James Green was also in this bracket. He just lost his first match. And then Logan Massa also lost his first match. 86 kilograms, we had Zahid Valencia, Alex Derringer, and Pat Downey. All 3 guys ended up taking the podium. So we had gold from Zahid, silver from Derringer, and bronze from Downey. Downey ended up losing to Derringer by a score of 3-2 in the semifinals. Derringer then went on to face Zahid Valencia and ended up losing that by a score of 7-5 in the finals. But Zahid right now is most likely going to be the NCAA champion at 184 pounds in folk style, but for him to win a tournament like this and do so in pretty dominant fashion. I mean, he won his first match 11-1, second match 10-0, and then had a 7-5 win over Derringer, which is a really big win. Really makes things interesting there to see where he's going to be able to go. Obviously, 86 kilograms is not going to be an easy weight for him. He's got David Tiller that he's going to have to deal with. But so far, so good for him. He's doing everything he has to do right now to prepare himself to be the guy, and definitely can't knock him for the performance he had right there. At 97 kilograms, we had Kyle Snyder, who is expected to be the guy at this weight for America. Obviously, he's won 3 world/Olympic titles in the past, but hasn't been quite as successful in recent years. But he ended up losing in the semifinals, or I don't remember if it was the semis or the quarters. We ended up losing to a guy named Mohammedian from Iran, who also was able to beat Bo Nickel. Bo Nickel won his first match, lost to Mohammedian, but then won his next match in the back draw and was supposed to face Kyle Snyder, but ends up forfeiting. I don't know what the reasoning behind that was, but it's kind of frustrating that we didn't get that match. Zilmer won his first match and then lost his second match, but Kyle Snyder, after losing to Muhammadian, got the forfeit from Bo Nickel and then won another match to get bronze. And then at heavyweight, or 125, we just had one guy go, as Tony Nelson, and he lost his first match. Last thing to talk about is going to be the European Championships. So as I mentioned earlier, or at the start of the show, this is one of the biggest jiu-jitsu tournaments out there for the IBJJF. So definitely one of the 4 biggest gi tournaments of the year, starting off right away. Got a bunch of good guys who are in it. They don't have everyone. They don't have all the top guys, but a lot of the really good ones are there. So at Roosterweight, they got Bruno Malfacini and Taliesin Suarez, among other guys. I know Tommy Langaker is going to be in here. Keenan Cornelius will be competing. Manuel Hibamar. I know Patrick Gardio's in there. And we've also got Jonatas Gracie and a few other pretty big names there. So this will be a really good opportunity for some of the big names to stay on top of the podium and sort of prepare themselves for the bigger tournaments later on in the year. But it's also going to be a good opportunity for some really good European guys, or guys who are flying out there even, to have a shot at some of the big names and even get some wins and really build themselves up and make a name for themselves in 2020. So that covers it for this week. Next week I'll be covering, I'll be recapping UFC Raleigh. I'll also be recapping the Europeans. This is going to be another week where it's going to be interesting to see how the timing works in terms of when I'm able to get the podcast out. I might have to do it in pieces because I'll be gone for most of the weekend. But either way, like was the case with this weekend, a lot of attention was brought towards the world of MMA and a lot of news stories came out, especially with the fight announcements, I'm sure. Now in the wake of Conor fighting and there being a lot of attention on MMA, there are going to be some other big stories that come out as well. So whatever comes up over the course of the week, I'll be sure to talk about next week as well. So that covers it. Hope you guys enjoy the fights, and hopefully this podcast helped put some extra context on them for you.